Good morning. It's our pleasure to share with you some information on grapevine pruning dates. This presentation has been prepared by my colleague Dr. Anne Pellegrino and myself.
Hello, I'm Anne. So what are we going to talk about during this presentation? We'll try to answer to those three questions. First, is it worth to delay grapevine pruning and why? Then, when to prune to delay bud break and for how long the delay would be? Third question, what are the pros and cons of delayed pruning?
To properly reason delayed pruning, it's important to get some basic knowledge on what is dormancy, winter dormancy, what is behind the concept of acrotony, what is called the phylochron, and obviously we are going to speak about the carbohydrate reserves. You all know what grapevine dormancy is about, but it's important to remember that there are two stages. The endodormancy, which is released by winter temperature, and the ecodormancy, that is subdivided in two stages, before grapevine tears and during grapevine tears. And speaking about delaying bud break, pre-bud break pruning, those 2 or 3 stages are important.
This figure represents the average temperature over the winter period for the Montpellier Supergros vineyard from December 2020 to January 2021. The red line represents the threshold of 8 degrees. And as you can see in this example, we had more than 10 days with temperature below 10 degrees, and we can assume that the endodormancy was released. It's important to indicate that it's not always the case for all vineyard situations, because under some climates, winter temperatures are warmer, and sometimes it's difficult to reach 10 days with temperature below this threshold.
Another information to share is that during summer, the latent buds are entering in dormancy when the basis, the bottom part of the primary shoots, are lignified. So this can occur, depending on the climate and the variety, already in July and August in the northern hemisphere. So, what is grapevine acrotony? Grapevine acrotony means that on a winter cane, which is on a vertical position, the top latent buds will develop first, inhibiting the bottom latent buds, obviously from bud break onwards. In general, more than 6 latent buds are needed to get a strong acrotony effect on the winter cane.
The acrotony differs from the apical dominance, which corresponds to the inhibition of lateral development due to the presence of the apex, and notably resulting from the hormone release from this apex. This apical dominance will occur in a zone of 4 to 6 nodes just below the apex and will decrease along the main axis for more distal laterals. Of course, if this apex is cut, this apical dominance will be released.
As you already know, acrotony is released by putting canes horizontally or by bending the canes while doing cane pruning.
From bud break onward, we can determine how many leaves are held by the main shoot using the concept of phylochron. The phylochron corresponds to the thermal time between 2 successive unfolded leaves, and we have shown that in grapevine for different cultivars the phylochron is around 21 degree days. This means that if we have more than 21 degree days, we can see a new unfolded leaves on the main shoot. The phylochron is calculated from the sum of daily average temperature minus 10 degrees. 10 degrees is a base temperature at which we start to have development in grapevine. So for example, if over 2 consecutive days the average temperature is at least 20.5 degrees, this means that we have enough temperature to see a new unfolded leaves. So this concept is very interesting to determine over the cropping season how many leaves are produced by the main shoot. Although the phylochron is very stable for different pedoclimatic conditions, it is important to say that high constraints like high vine nutritional imbalance of mineral, nitrogen, carbohydrate, or high water deficit can impact the phylochron. This phylochron will be longer. This means that the rate of leaf development will be more slowly.
On a shoot, on a grapevine shoot, a phytomere is a node plus the internode and the associated organs.
The initial development of the shoots after bud break highly relies on the carbohydrate reserves which were stored during the preceding season in the perennial organ, which are the trunk and mainly the roots. These carbohydrates are stored in the form of starch up to leaf fold during the preceding season. So why this carbohydrate reallocation is quite important for the development of the leaves, of the inflorescence and for the final yield? It is because these new leaves which are unfolded after bud break are sink organs. Their photosystem is not mature enough to produce enough sugar. On the main stem, you need to know that the first 8 to 10 leaves just below the apical zone are young leaves and they are sink leaves. When they reach this rank number 10, they become source leaves. They are adult leaves. So at flowering, as the primary shoot bears around 70 leaves, that means that we have half of the leaves which are sink organs and half of the leaves which are source organs. This flowering period is a kind of transition between the sink status for carbohydrate and the source status. Let's address now the question of when to prune a vine to delay bud break. Should this pruning be before bud break, after bud break, and why?
As you already know, one of the main goals to delay bud break is to try to avoid early spring frost. The slide is showing the organization of a latent bud, and in the latent bud there are two main buds, the principal one and the secondary one. The principal bud is bearing the yield and the secondary bud is normally unfertile. But both, anyway, are very sensitive to negative temperatures from minus 2.5 to minus 3.5. Pre-bud break, the latent buds can support negative temperature up to minus 7 degrees. From bud break onwards, from very early bud break stages as woolly buds, the latent buds become sensitive to negative temperature, as we said, around minus 2.5 to minus 3.5. And obviously, as they are growing, they are becoming more and more sensitive to negative temperatures.
As you already know, there is not a unique date of bud break. This date of bud break highly depends on the cultivar and the climatic conditions of the vineyard. This is a layout of our experimentation on delayed pruning on Syrah that was performed at Montpellier Supagro, and we imposed 3 dates of pruning, one in December during the endodormancy period, and 2 after the endodormancy period released, 1 in March before bud break and 1 in April after bud break. Let's see the results from the pre-bud break pruning on Syrahs.
This slide is to summarize our first results on pre-bud break pruning on Syrahs. And we did prune during endodormancy, as I said, and during ecodormancy, before tears, and during grapevine tears. And only option 3 allows to delay bud break for a few days. Obviously, in your condition, it will depend on the association, combination between variety and site. So to summarize, in other words, the best period pre-bud break to prune to delay bud break is during grapevine tears. This figure is showing some of our pre-bud break pruning results obtained in 2020. And we did show that the best period to delay bud break, applying pre-bud break pruning, was during grapevine tears.
Reasoning post-bud break pruning is a little bit more complex than reasoning pre-bud break pruning. To reason pruning after bud break, there is a need to consider the concept of acrotony, the concept of phylochrone, and also to consider the carbohydrate reserves that were stored during winter in the perennial organ. To illustrate the concept of acrotony, you can see on the left side of your screen a vine that was pruned during winter to 2 buds, and in April those 2 buds are burst. And the shoot, the most apical shoot, already holds 3 unfolded leaves. On the right side of your screen, you can see a cane that wasn't pruned during winter. This cane holds 12 buds, and in April, 8 among these 12 buds are already burst. This concerns the most apical buds. And in the basal zone, you can see that you have 4 buds that are not burst yet. The shoots also hold between 1 and 3 unfolded leaves. So it is possible at this stage to prune the vine, and we will delay bud break because the most distal buds didn't burst yet.
So this year, on the 21st of April, 15 days of the normal pruning date, we did prune those long canes which already developed the top latent buds, and we can see on the right hand side photo that most of the bottom buds did not develop at that date. So in this example, we did delay bud break by 15 to 20 days. This slide is showing that when we did prune 15 days after the normal bud break period, most of the top latent buds already developed, bearing primary shoots having 4 to 7 leaves and visible inflorescences. But more than 80% of the bottom latent bud were not developed.
This slide here addresses the question of carbohydrate reserves. As we said before, the carbohydrate reserves are stored in the trunk, in the root, but also in the cane. And here there are preliminary results showing some observation we made of starch within the cane using iodine. You can see that irrespective of the young shoot development, there is some starch in the cane holding the young shoots. There shall be also some sucrose, but we cannot see the coloration of sucrose. And for sure, we should complete those observations by biochemical analysis to quantify the level of soluble sugar and starch that is present in the cane. It would be interesting to build a relationship between this level of carbohydrate stored in the cane and the level of shoot development to try to address what would be the best window in terms of pruning to make sure that the carbohydrate reserve depletion is not too high, because we know that the young shoots and the inflorescences development rely on this carbohydrate reallocation. We have seen that by applying pruning just after bud break, we were able to delay bud burst by about 15 days or even more. Now the question is, what are the impact of this pruning post-bud break on the other phenological stages?
Looking at our 2020 results on Syrahs, we see that only post-bud break pruning did delay the phenological stages as flowering, veraison, and ripening. The situation 4, the photo 4, is showing, and that's something which is well known, that by delaying post-bud break pruning too late, and photo 4 is about 1 month after the normal bud break period, we see that certainly because of the depletion of carbohydrate reserves, then now we do affect yield. And we can have a decrease in yield with post-bud break pruning by 20 to 80%, depending on the date, the variety, and the site.
So pruning after bud break is a risk for the plant in terms of carbohydrate reserves depletion and yield loss. So the question is, what would be the best window to prune after bud break? There is no unique answer, no recipe, because this pruning date window will depend on the site, the climate, the soil, on the soil water content from bud break onwards. It will depend on the varieties, on the phylochrone, on the level of carbohydrate reserve stored from the previous year, and also, lastly, on the speed of carbohydrate depletion in relation with the young primary shoot development. So how to reason the date of pruning after bud break? It would be very relevant to calibrate a relationship between the level of carbohydrate depletion in the cane and the level of shoot development, as we saw before, to try to calibrate for a specific site the best date of pruning versus the variety and the pedoclimatic conditions.
By measuring and following some very classical parameters of fruit composition, it's possible to demonstrate that with post-bud break pruning, we can delay the ripening period.
This slide is to show that from bud burst onwards to flowering, the choice of the best pruning date after the normal date of bud burst is a matter of reaching a balance between the carbohydrate supply and the carbohydrate demand. As we saw before, early in the season, the carbohydrate supply mainly comes from the reserves, and as the leaves become mature, the net photosynthesis will also provide carbohydrate. The plant carbon demand is due to the overall respiration for the growth and the maintenance of the organs, and the biomass accumulation in the organs, which depend on the phylochrone and the individual growth of each organs.
One original suggestion to assess if post-bud break pruning did delay ripening is to follow the dynamic of berry sugar accumulation from the onset of veraison, which is berry softening, to the plateau of berry sugar accumulation. The methods of berry sugar accumulation is described in the recent paper that is shown on this slide. The paper is describing an experimentation showing relationships between berry sugar accumulation and berry and wine composition and wine aromatic profiles. These studies have been conducted by National Wine and Grape Industry Center at Charles Sturt University, and the experimentations have been funded by Wine Australia. We cannot ignore the drawbacks associated with post-bud break pruning. We already spoke about the loss of yield depending on carbohydrate reserves depletion linked to the choice of the post-bud break pruning dates, the loss of vigor, more importantly, some logistic issues to organize post-bud break pruning by hand. So, what about mechanical pruning when possible? And labor issues, depending on the vineyard area, and the associated cost issues doing hand pruning. So, post-bud break pruning is a good idea for some sites, some specific sites, and for small vineyards.
We are now at the end of this presentation, and we are very glad to share with you some papers that were used for this presentation.
Anne Pellegrino and myself, we thank you very much for your attention. We hope that you did enjoy this presentation. Keep well.